Morning all. Let's have a look now chronologically at game 7, because we've looked at game 4. I'm just taking the decisive games of the recent Rybka Houdini match, which ended in victory actually for Houdini, which is a bit of a shock to the world of computer chess, and Houdini's actually starting to be listed on some of the major lists. So this has some profound implications actually if grandmasters are going to start using Houdini for preparation, and especially if it has a dynamic sacrificial style. Maybe we'll see even more amazing dynamism reflected in openings coming out in the future of games. So I think this was a key match, a kind of unofficial battle of the titans, the strongest two engines arguably on the planet at the moment. So in game 7, Rybka playing white played e4, and we saw actually a test of the Alekhine Defence from their opening books. Obviously they're given opening books, so that's the human sort of ingredient, but the big question is, is the Alekhine Defence really playable? Well, Fischer played it in the 1972 match, and I think he did well with it. So here, it's provocation. It's a kind of positional sacrifice in its own right, because you're giving the opponent more space, hoping maybe to exploit weaknesses later. So what's really happening in the opponent's pawn structure is it's getting more fixed and then prone for later undermining, like tooth decay or something. So so here, e5, knight d5, okay, and we have the full kind of blast of the main Alekhine Defence provocation system. There are more conservative ways of playing against the Alekhine Defence. You don't have to thrust all your pawns like this, but this was played. So d4, so d6, and now f4. So this is one of the sharpest lines. Obviously white's putting pawns on dark squares, which means there's light square restraint implications, as we've seen in previous games. And the bishop actually goes immediately on that light square diagonal here, this key one, after knight c3, e6. So that's sort of interesting that maybe g6 could have been considered. I would have considered g6 if it had been one of my blitz games. So putting the bishop here is quicker than fianchettoing it, and also it carries with it a very interesting idea of further provoking a white pawn forward, because it carries the possibility later of bishop h4 check, which although might waste time seemingly because it could be kicked back, it's yet another pawn that would be on dark squares, so watch out for that later. So that's another point really of not fianchettoing. Bishop e3, now black castles, bishop d3, which seems a bit positionally suspect. Why would white want to also get rid of his light square defender, and wouldn't leave this bishop, which is looking rather dumb, behind loads of dark square pawns? Well, as I say, the space implication here, space can often be used for extra piece mobility and getting a kingside attack, but without the light square bishop, the vulnerabilities in the king position might not be too severe. Okay, so d5, immediately putting more pressure on the light squares and sort of hemming in this bishop a little bit more. Okay, so c5, seemingly, as white, when I first started chess, to play this move against the Alekhine, I thought, what is black up to? But later you realise that this is the start sometimes of irreparable damage really to your position, as you're plonking all these pawns in fixed positions. They become a source for later undermining. So here knight c4, and now b6. There was a guy from Czech Republic that was playing for Bonnet Chess Club called Peter Zychek, and he was playing the Alekhines against me, and we had these games where often I had the space advantage and he was playing the Alekhines, and he would undermine later and it would be ferocious. The pieces after really are on fire sometimes, because there's so many weaknesses later to exploit. So here another pawn push, b3. So this is probably a record number of pawn pushes from white in this match, and yet another one is coming up now after knight a4, because what to do about c5? You don't really want to play b4, the huge knight on c4, and then also there'll be a5 later. So Rybka played knight a4, but now check. So this is really taking the mickey out of white, kind of saying, please put all your pawns, on dark squares. How many of them are on dark squares now? And we've got a dark square bishop, and black's bishop is complementary actually to most of these pawns on light squares, and the two knights are ready to dance around soon. They're going to do a dance, it's basically undermining and playing on the queen side. The bishop keeps a useful eye on the g5 square, so knight g5's h7 is not really that much of an exploitable weakness here. So this binding, this wedge in the center, okay, it looks aggressive, but is it? That's the key question always in chess. Exploitable weaknesses or real weaknesses. Exploitable advantage or visual advantages. Is it just the visual advantage? This pawn wedge with e5. So anyway, white castles now. Queen d7, which maintains a kind of grip on f5, as well as the queen potentially coming to the queen side. So it's a magical central move, giving the queen some independence, some flexibility to work on both sides of the board there. Queen d7. Okay. And there also might be some tactical implications off that, like knight c4 is made possible if the queen's on a4. King g2. Okay. Now, a knight's dance. Knight fianchettos to b7, but it's putting immediate tactical pressure on c5, so it's not just a pretty looking maneuver. So what to do about that? Bishop e3, and now knight c6. I think black would welcome cb here, because the b4 square would be under black's control at the moment from these two guys, and showing the c file, this pawn would be a liability if knight b4. So white keeps it locked with rook c1, but now we have potential queenside counterplay, rook fb8. So black's not too worried about his king safety with knight g5s or f5s. He's got that, the queen's doing a fine job maybe guarding that f5 square indirectly. Queen a6, Rybka's plunging into the queen side, but now b takes c, some tension is resolved. Now knight b4 evicting the queen. Now, the c6 square is a bit tasty for black. Knight d8, marking the use of the c6 square, and also protecting the knight, and also making way maybe for a5, and queen b5 in particular. The knight being moved here, queen b5 is now possible. So rook b1, a5, which means, white's getting a little bit tied down. He has to be wary of a4s sometimes if the knight wasn't, gripping or blockading against a4. And now we see queen b5. So this pawn's starting to look a bit vulnerable in these variations. If the queens came off, you can imagine knight b7, or the pawn being vulnerable. So queen f2, and now we see queen b7, putting the queen actually on a diagonal of the king, which there is theoretically some weaknesses here. But it seems in this situation it would seem ambitious to say that these weaknesses are going to be a problem later. a3, now knight a6, knight dancing around. h3, another pawn move. Now knight c6. So black has an incredible bind on b4 against b4 from white. And also, this pawn is liberated. There are options to play d4 at the right moment. So bear that in mind. Queen c2, now rook e8, mysterious rook move. Probably designed against f5 to try and get some pressure on e5, if maybe ef and like bishop f8 in some lines. Okay, bishop f2, and now rook ab8. So, bit of waiting from both sides. King h2, making the king a little bit safer maybe off that diagonal, off this diagonal. So h6, committal move now from Houdini. King g2, now rook bd8. So a bit of a stirring contest here. Let's carry on just playing these moves because it's a long game, as many of these engine games are. Bit of a stirring contest. Who's going to crack first? Is anything exciting going to happen? We've seen this pattern in previous games. It's like a bit of impatience creeps into Rybka somehow. after a brief staring contest like this, there's some sort of minor concession given soon, or was it? Okay, because at the moment it seems, again, black's not really interested in trying to win this game or play for d4, because d4 is under white's control, right? It's completely blockaded. So why would black ever be tempted to play for d4? The funny thing is, here, after this last move, bishop f2, which Nimzovich wouldn't be pleased with, because he's into blockading pawns as a kind of what he calls prophylaxis. Now, prophylaxis is actually something beyond if-then calculation, beyond the horizon of engines. When you blockade a pawn, you've basically stopped that pawn's mobility, like to play d4. So when you unblockade, okay, you could be arrogant. You could say, I've looked at all the if-thens into the future, and there's no way, that the pawn moving is a major problem. Here's a philosophical question, though. I'll set you guys, or a thought. If there's no problem with keeping the bishop blockading the pawn, and there's a 0.01 probability of a problem after bishop f2, what one would you prefer? You see, this is like a 0 or 1 basically, then, because this is infinitely times more risky then to unblockade the d pawn than keeping the blockade on d4. Would you say that? In this case, I mean, it looks as though also intuitively to us humans that the queen is actually well placed at the moment on the diagonal, but of course we wouldn't be able to calculate how to expose that particularly. Although, often in such situations with this French defence pawn structure, often f6 is a very damaging move, even if it involves sacrificing a pawn, because it sort of rips open the position. And when a position is even slightly opened, if there are already underlying king safety issues, then it's like the king's getting a bit naked and the temperature of the room has just dropped by a few degrees. So, okay, so basically this move, bishop f2, is infinitely more dangerous than keeping a blockade on d4. It reflects non-prophylaxis, but rather arrogance with saying, the if-thens will take care of everything. And in fact, this arrogance is now tested by Houdini. So this is a critical move now at move 48. d4. So is it arrogant to assume that the white king is going to be safe, or there's some major problem with d4? Well, as we say, it all depends on the position, or does it? Nimzovich's principles are rock solid safety sometimes about blockade. So we see here queen c4. Is it going to actually be proven that the king safety issue is not an issue, and in fact the issue here is the pawn being weak? Well, in this position, I'll just put in my version of Rybka on this proxy machine. It's given as a slight advantage to white here, but Rybka's not crying out in an annotation, oh, I've unblockaded the d pawn, I've created some danger on the diagonal. Theoretically, it doesn't acknowledge any theoretical danger. And Houdini just plays actually knight d7, which actually I don't think. Okay, knight d7. What is knight d7 doing? You might ask, and that's a good question. Well, I think it might actually be supporting the idea of f6, which is a classic breakout move in the French defence as a mechanism to open positions, because that f file is often good for a rook to blast, because otherwise how would you get a rook blasting down a file here anyway? What would you use to get this rook down any particular file? In fact, I can only see the f file being used. I guess you could also imagine maybe the g file if g5 g takes. Okay, there. That's another possibility. I mean, we've got a semi-open file here anyway, but no, knight d7 supports f6, and here it's played f6. Okay, my Rybka still likes white here, no sense of danger. Rook e2 now takes, and I think it was relying on a tactical refutation of this move, because obviously, even to us, we should see that this is not a good move because of rook f8 with the blasting rook, even to us. So Rybka's if-then arrogance was based maybe on this move here, f5. Unfortunately, and here's the magic of chess, you know, a bit of dynamism here, and the temperature of the room is going down now for the white king because of this next move, knight f8, and the evaluation is starting to shift now in black's favour. A lot of damage has already been done for white's king safety on the diagonal. So rook takes e5, okay, and this becomes a real pawn sack. Bishop f6, after rook moves back, rook d7. I mean, look at this. This is just incredible stuff. We can see the temperature of the room's gone down for the white king. We can see the blockade was lifted, and there shouldn't have been this liberating move, giving the queen on the diagonal. But this move here, to be able to look at this mysterious rook move here, rook d7, it's basically saying this temporary pawn sack on e6 is only temporary, because I'm going to gang up on the e6 pawn, I'm going to regain my pawn, and therefore I'm going to justify opening this diagonal and justify f6, and that bishop's also going to be nice here, you know, across the diagonal supporting d4. So it's starting to justify the whole d4 thing, and we can only reflect on Nimzowitsch and the wisdom of Nimzowitsch about blockades. You know, they're beyond if-then calculation. That's why, by the way, I prefer Nimzowitsch to Kotov, because I don't believe in all this if-then stuff, especially in human chess. I like the idea of positional principles. They transcend calculation risk. So we have a breach, basically, of principles here. But is White saying, you know, he's material up here? He's not. It's only temporary. So we have 5 pawns, we have 6 pawns, but there's ganging up. That is now an exploitable weakness, e6. And along with winning, conquering that exploitable weakness, the white king is getting exposed here. So knight b2, knight h7, immediate, you know, major threats, knight g5, can take the time to win e6, as well as, you know, fork f3 and e6. So queen d3, knight g5, putting pressure on these guys. Knight c4, and now this other knight steps in aggressively, hitting a lot of key squares. Knight cd2, and now finally recapturing the pawn. Advantage to black in this position. What's happened? All of black's pieces are really activated. What's happened to all those pawns on dark squares from the opening? White's position's really crumbled, and here we see a ferociousness, you know, exploitation, you know, doubling up rooks very comfortably. So black is able to increase pressure now. White's not. White's stuck without a plan. He shakily moves the king. Now queen takes c5, and who's material up? Black. That pawn was also goner. Why couldn't White have protected it? That's a good question. Couldn't White have played b4? Let's have a quick look. b4. This looks dangerous. Bishop g5 in this position, with the idea of taking and then rook f7. So say king h2 takes, and now rook f7. This is quite dangerous on the f file. So the king's looking increasingly shaky here. These lines have been blown wide open for rooks, when previously, you know, one couldn't imagine that possibility. But you know, this pawn sack to get in knight e4, which is seemingly dangerous, you know, threatening the black king's safety, hitting, you know, c5 and f6, but it's all under control. Queen f5, g4, the queen moves back, takes a forcing sequence, bishop h4, forcing g5, weakening slightly the black king, but it's not exploitable weaknesses. There isn't massive pressure around these squares. And now Houdini supports its pawn, so it's clearly better now. Okay, bishop d6, hitting the rook, knight d2, threatening again something seemingly dangerous, but look at all these weaknesses around the king, this vacuum. rook d8, rook f1, and now knight f4. Black's clearly doing fantastically and has liberated totally his position, has no problem pieces. All the pieces are doing something. Now knight d5 with seemingly nasty knight e3 centralizing move threat. Okay, so this move, okay, it ties down the knight maybe to the f4 pawn, but now Houdini plays a very aggressive move to further kind of, it seems, further weakening the white king. It plays h5. Now in the game g5 was played, so I guess queen g5, rook g1. Let's just make sure. just test the basics. Yes, rook g1 is the move there, and if g takes, I guess the g file would have been useful for black. Rook g7, yes. So I'm just checking some basic assumptions. Maybe rook g3 next is possible. Okay, so basically g5 was played. So white's king is even weaker now. Queen f5. And now knight c4. Okay. So here, tactically, I guess knight e3 is not working yet. Let's have a quick check. I guess that's a blunder. Yes, knight takes e3. And, of course, a computer is not going to horrifically blunder. We'll be tempted for that. But I just wanted to see. So rook e7, using the pin itself on the queen. Rook takes d4. Okay, so it was also a temporary pawn sack for this next move, queen e6, which really looks as though queen e2 to get the rook, one of the rooks on the 7th rank, to do some real damage to the white position. And it's here actually that Rybka decides the only way to solve this position now is to sacrifice the exchange. It sacrifices the exchange with rook d takes f4. So what was really the major problem here? Let's imagine rook f2 as a token move. Oh, sorry. The major problem I take all of that back. Look, the rook is also stuck on d4 and still threatened after that tactic. So this was a neat little tactic here, provoking rook d4. The rook's trapped, it can't go to e4, so that's the point. It's not about queen e2s. Pardon me. It stops rook e4. Rook e4 is stopped. So Houdini's basically forcefully wrenched out the exchange in this last tactical transaction. If we just action replay this little goal. Queen f5 after knight c4. Oh, just win the exchange. Rook e7. Okay, so rook d4, queen e6, just winning the exchange, because where's the rook going? But here, could white have played anything else then? If rook e1, let's ask a silly question. f3. So the rook being pinned to the queen is not particularly healthy. And if rook takes d4 here, it gets a bit hairy. Queen takes g2, threatening mate. And now, if rook g1, rook e2 check, this is mind-blowing tactics. Check, takes, threatening to queen, the rook's still en prise. And here, knight c3, obviously with rook d1 winning. So that was the point. Obviously, you guys all saw that, didn't you? So, so it wrenched out the exchange, basically, here. Winning the exchange. I hope we're all agreed. This is totally winning the exchange, this manoeuvre, queen e6. Where's the rook going? So, after winning the exchange... Whoops! Yes, why is it winning the exchange? Sorry, again, I correct myself. It's not, it was pinned to the rook. But here there's a big problem. Because the queen and knight are eyeing h3. So this queen excursion looks very, very dangerous. So after rook e8, again, the queen is just threatening a mate in 2 here. And the queen can't come back to d3 or defend h3 that easily. So basically Rybka had calculated this. And giving up the queen was the best continuation. So rook and knight versus queen. Now comes check. Nope, not check. Queen e2 is also a strong move, though, according to my Rybka. I was just checking the analysis thing. Queen b8 less, but actually queen b8 was played. So I'm going to turn off my little Rybka. So queen b8, and now we see check. and a powerful centralizing move, queen d3, which I have no clue what exactly it does without turning on my Rybka again. I'm going to have to turn it on. What on earth does queen d3 do? It probably leaves white in a kind of virtual zugzwang. Let's see just king takes h5 as an experiment. Queen g3 here. Okay, and if rook h4, king g7, and a sort of mating net's being woven here, because now there's like queen f3 maybe. If we give a token move, queen f3, then takes, then here, then queen f3, and then finally queen a8. Okay, I don't know. It looks as though this is sort of zugzwangy, probably tactically, with something dropping off. Let's go back to the main game continuation. So g6 was played, queen takes g6. Now it seems as though there's some knight and rook coordination going on here, but I guess it's all taken care of. Queen d5, queen g2. So Rybka plays rook e3, and then we have check. Seeming now a reply with check, but and now actually black's advantage has gone to +7. So say it was resigned here for black. You know, Rybka resigns. So say king h7, and Rybka plays knight d3. We could have check, and if king takes, we can have c4. And I think finally this is getting too tactically vulnerable. Or is it? Check. Yeah, knight's dropping off in this line as an example. Let's just say that further material was dropping off here. Okay, so if you ever thought the Alekhines was a bit unsound because you're giving up space, think again. You're fixing the opponent's pawn structure. You're creating a kind of tooth decay effect when the pawns are kind of undermined until sometimes there can be a king safety implication as part of that, and a kind of classic French defence opening up move f6 was employed in this game as well as part of the pawn sacrifice to sort of lower the temperature in the room for the white king being kind of exposed. The white king being exposed here with this key move, this key breakthrough move, which seems to imply pawn sack. Couldn't white have just kept a blockade on d4? That's how to play against engines. You need to use Nimzovich. Keep your blockades. It's a key lesson. If you don't, some horrible engine in the future is gonna like justify seemingly crazy pawn sacrifices. So here's one. The d4 pawn looks vulnerable, and now losing the e6 pawn. But the calculations being here supporting it, it's going to regain e6 with advantage, with two whole lines being opened up, the E and F files being opened up here, and black's pieces all seem very, very lively. We have a very complex tactical transaction going on here in this sequence. So it wasn't about winning the exchange after queen e6, it was about sort of decoying the queen to d8 then. Okay, that's my news story on it, because the knight and queen coordinating on that h3 move. So then if we go back then in calculations, h5 is triggering all this, because it's creating this road onto the h3 weakness. This is all super deep stuff. I think this will go beyond the tactics of any GN game, even this seemingly simple h5 move. What's behind it is this labyrinth of calculations that show, you know, this tactical transaction is backfiring for white here. This rook takes d4. So here, okay, so the rook's kind of trapped. So this is kind of forced sequence, and remember, we've seen this kind of pattern also when Rybka beat Johnny, you know, that Johnny with 800 cores, with this queen getting distracted because the king attack was too vicious. So it seems Rybka's on the receiving end of such a dynamic sacrificial attack. But and the coordination now is breaking down here in this position apparently. for the rook and knight, and they're not able to hold the fort. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.